As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So Russian President Vladimir Putin on Monday night delivered his first address to Russia since Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin's short-lived uprising ended on Saturday, and Putin vowed to the mercenary fighters that he would uphold his side of the deal that was reached to end the mutiny. So Putin thanked Russian citizens and his security forces for opposing the mutiny. Putin said, quote, "A firm, unambiguous position in support of the constitutional order was taken by public organizations, religious denominations, leading political parties, in fact, the entire Russian society. Everyone was united and rallied by the main thing, responsibility for the fate of the fatherland," end quote. So Putin did not mention Prigozhin by name, saying only that the organizers of the rebellion had betrayed their country. The Russian leader said that Ukraine and its Western backers wanted to see Russians kill each other and for the country to plunge into civil war. Putin said, quote, "They wanted Russian soldiers to kill each other so that military personnel and civilians would die, so that in the end, Russia would lose and our society would split, choke in bloody civil strife. They rubbed their hands, dreaming of taking revenge for their failures at the front and during the so-called counteroffensive, but they miscalculated," end quote. So discussing the Wagner members, Putin said that the overwhelming majority of the fighters and commanders of the mercenary force are Russian patriots. He said, quote, "Therefore, from the very beginning of the events, on my direct instructions, steps were taken to avoid a lot of bloodshed," end quote. Putin thanked Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko for mediating negotiations to end the crisis that led to a deal. Putin vowed to uphold the agreement by offering Wagner members the options of signing contracts with the Russian Defense Ministry or going home or traveling to Belarus. He said the promises that he made will be fulfilled. So Biden also denied that the U.S.'s NATO allies were involved in the uprising. He said, quote, "They agree with me that we had to make sure we gave Putin no excuse to blame this on the West, to blame this on NATO. We made clear that we were not involved, that we had nothing to do with it. This was part of a struggle within the Russian system," end quote. And so far, Russia says that they're investigating it. They're saying that the U.S. and the West likely wanted to take advantage of it, but they're not, outright accusing them of being involved. Gitmo, the notorious torture prison. So this official said that there have been significant improvements at Gitmo since, the torture at the prison was exposed. But she said that the 30 men who remain are living with their past experiences. So this is Fionola Ní Ailán. I probably butchered her name. She's an Irish human rights lawyer. She said, quote, "I observed that after 2 decades of custody, the suffering of those detained is profound, and it's ongoing. Every single detainee I met with lives with unrelenting harms that follow from systematic practices of rendition, torture, and arbitrary detention. Past experiences of torture live with them in the present without any obvious end in sight, including because they have not received any adequate torture rehabilitation to date," end quote. I mean, that's, she's saying, they were tortured in these facilities and they're still there. And they're also facing other harsh treatment, including constant surveillance, forced removal from their cells, and the unjust use of restraints. So she made several recommendations, including the shuttering of the facility. She said they should close it down. She said the U.S. government must apologize for torturing the detainees and provide reparations. And the U.S. State Department issued a statement that said the U.S. condemns torture and all that. And then I just noted another example of the U.S. Involved with torture. That the Biden administration is still seeking the extradition of Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks founder, because he exposed U.S. war crimes. That's why they want his extradition, and they want to lock him away for his entire life. So while Assange has been held in London's Belmarsh prison on no charges since April 2019, and a guy named Nils Melzer, who is a Swiss professor academic, he determined that Assange's treatment amounts to prolonged psychological torture. In giving the award, the organizers noted that the anti-war team publishes news reports, analysis, radio interviews, and videos. They are consistently reliable and accurate, from Yugoslavia in the 1990s to Ukraine today. Antiwar.com is a vital voice seeking truth and clarity in the fog of war and propaganda. So that's very nice, and we really appreciate it.
How did this play out in the European media, in Great Britain, in France, in Germany, in Switzerland, and Italy?
Well, as you can imagine, just like in the United States, the neocon part of our very controlled media was for a moment, I mean, in places like the UK, I mean, it was in sort of delirium with excitement that, you know, this was coming. This was the pièce de résistance. I mean, after the offensive now, Russia was going to be in complete chaos. There was going to be civil war. It was the end of Putin. This was wonderful. You know, now we can put aside, we don't have to worry so much about the Ukrainian offensive because we've got Putin in the sights and he's going to be destroyed in the civil war. And then suddenly nothing happened. Within a few hours, there was a negotiation, all settled. No one is being punished. No one is having any being imprisoned or arrested or anything like that. Prigozhin is gone to Belarus with a number of the Wagner. Wagner is going to be reformed and changed a little bit in its format, but it'll be brought in under the Ministry of Defense. So there'll be some reforms. But after all that excitement among some sectors of the West who were hoping that this was going to be the moment that, you know, they'd all been longing for when Russia would be broken up and collapse. And then they suddenly got the message, oh, there's been a negotiation, everything's settled, they're going back to Ukraine, the forces, the convoy en route to Moscow is turning around and going home. And I don't think in those people in Europe know what to think about it. Frankly, they're just thinking, oh, my God, how did this happen? Was it theater? Was it real?
Good evening, sheep. Over the weekend, professional bow tie wearer and part-time scientist Dr. Peter Hotez had quite the public meltdown over the Joe Rogan and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. podcast. As a result of his meltdown, Dr. Hotez then proceeded to set a world record in what's called getting ratioed on Twitter. Congratulations to him on that. We'll tell you about it tonight in our special report, along with some new, never-before deadly statistics about what Hotez thinks is safe and effective. Trust him, he's a doctor. Science. The drama began when World Veterinary Medicine champion Joe Rogan released a 3-hour-long podcast with presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. For portions of the podcast, Kennedy discussed everything that we at the mainstream media censor. It was rather inconvenient. It was the same kind of information that has caused the pharmaceutical companies, Biden administration, mainstream media, and bureaucrats posing as public health officials, such as Peter Hotez, to relentlessly smear and tarnish Kennedy's name. Well, the Thought Police report filed by Hotez indicates that Kennedy cited scientific studies about that aren't favorable to sales. He described documented adverse health events that can result from toxic materials in the jobs. And he factually described deceptive activities that have occurred between pharmaceutical companies and government officials that impact public health and therefore human lives. So in other words, Kennedy was basically saying that the Earth is flat, gravity doesn't exist, and he wants everyone to die. That's the Cliff Notes anyway.
There is a long and shameful history of U.S. politicians and bureaucrats weaponizing governmental powers against their political opponents. The First Amendment was not even a decade old when fear of influences on America by French agents was used to support the passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts. This outlawed false, scandalous, and malicious writings against the United States government, Congress, or the President, and made it illegal to conspire to oppose any measure or measures of the government of the United States. The weaponization of politics is another example of how hysteria over alleged foreign threats leads to less liberty. The claim that opponents of the U.S. government policy were serving interests of France is an early example. Sadly, critics of the U.S. government policy have been smeared for spreading disinformation to benefit hostile foreign powers many times since. During the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln oversaw the shutting down of newspapers and even the arresting of state legislators. After the U.S. became involved in World War I, Congress passed a new Seditions Act banning disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language toward the military or U.S. government. This act was used to imprison Eugene Debs, who then ran for president as the Socialist Party nominee while in prison. Opponents of U.S. involvement in World War II were accused by supporters of U.S. military intervention of being a fifth column for Germany's government. Later, opponents of wars in Vietnam, Iraq, and other countries where the U.S. intervened were subjected to government surveillance and harassment. Critics of U.S. foreign policy may be the first critics of the U.S. government targeting for opposing government policies, but they are not the last. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover targeted the civil rights movement and wiretapped and harassed Martin Luther King Jr. Hoover also kept files on those he deemed subversives, including even the pop music group The Monkees. Presidents of both parties have used the IRS against their political enemies. As an IRS agent told the head of a conservative organization who was being audited after calling for the impeachment of then President Clinton, "What do you expect when you target the president?" The drafters of the Constitution knew those with power would always be tempted to use their power against their opponents. Hence, they created a limited government where power was diffused and checked. Unfortunately, American politicians gave in to the temptation to weaponize the law against their opponents in the early days of the Republic. Since then, the growth of government has led to the growth of an unelected and unaccountable bureaucracy that plays an important role for the deep state. The deep state pursues its own agenda regardless of the wishes of the people. The deep state works to subvert those who oppose its agenda, using tactics up to and including the assassination of President Kennedy. A lesson of this history is that people who desire liberty should not trust the U.S. government to advance liberty. Instead, they need to be vigilant in ensuring the government acts within the limits stated in the Constitution. Making sure the government is pursuing a policy of peace and free trade abroad is also essential to promoting liberty at home. Thanks for listening.
Here's Gerald Celente with today's trends in the news.
Kerry's back in the news, saying stupid shit.
Today, we're going to start off by talking about one of my least favorite politicians.
Yeah.
But I don't even know if he qualifies as a politician. He's a troublemaker. And that is former Senator John Kerry. And I know a lot about him because I remember he made himself a name way back during the Vietnam era by taking an anti-war stand because he was awarded a few medals for who knows what. And he was very much in favor, but his excuse, he was just a kid then. He didn't know much about it, and there was a little bit to that. So he went to the White House lawn, threw his medals over the fence with the others. I thought, boy, now that guy really is a believer. But after that, it was downhill. I always kid, but seriously say, John Kerry peaked.
Yeah.
He peaked back there when he was, I think he was 21 years old when he did that. But now he's still around, and he's in all kinds of war. He's against the war on those people who say there's no climate change, this sort of thing. He's a radical environmentalist.
Biden is one of the most annoying busybodies and hecklers on earth. You know, he's President Biden's. Kerry is. Sorry, Kerry is one of the most annoying. Biden is too. That's a different story. One of the most annoying busybodies on earth. He's Biden's special envoy for climate change, right? So he rolls around the world in his big private jet, spewing out carbon or whatever they spew, killing the whales, and lecturing the rest of us about how we better stay inside and eat bugs. You know, that's what he does for a living. But before that, of course, he was a Secretary of State who presided over some of the most aggressive U.S. foreign policy actions in history, the most unjustified foreign policy actions in history, including unleashing jihadists in Syria to overthrow that government, unleashing jihadists in Libya to destroy that country, and turn it into a slave market. So, so Biden sends him over to get everyone really mad and fuming about that evil Putin invaded another country who didn't invade him first. And as you say, this one French journalist just said, but what about you guys? This is we chose this story because we talk about it a lot. They're just incapable. Someone like Kerry, the look on his face, they're incapable of judging anyone else, in their own shoes. I think you talk about people being sociopaths. Yeah. I think he'd be a good example.
Well, the reporter, the journalist, retorted him. He says, yes, we do have to judge Putin for crimes of aggression, of course. But you, the Americans, you committed the crime of aggression in Iraq.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's put up that first clip because we know it's on Zero Hedge, but it's all over Twitter. Everyone is playing it on Twitter, and it's very funny in a weird way, yeah. But to the next one now, our good friend Glenn Greenwald, he had something that he wrote about, and I apologize for the small print here. But here's how Greenwald put it. John Kerry is on a tour flamboyantly depicting Russia as a rogue state for invading a sovereign country, only for French journalist Darius Rochebin to remind him the U.S. has invaded multiple countries, and Kerry himself voted to authorize the Iraq War. Somebody's lying. Jonathan Turley says Congress should start bringing people in for answers in the Biden probe. And we're not going to go into the finer details because that's really our job here, Dr. Paul. But as you know, the point is you had whistleblowers and you had Merrick Garland and you had the U.S. Attorney David Weiss. Now, Garland claimed that Weiss had full authority to investigate Hunter Biden to the extent that he wanted to. There was no restraints. Well, the whistleblowers had a different story, which was that at every turn they were prevented from taking a true investigation. What the heck is going on? Where are these millions of dollars going into the Biden various bank accounts? Where are they coming from and what's it being paid for? So either Merrick Garland is lying or the whistleblowers are lying. And actually he has an article where he says that, Jonathan Turley does. So he's saying, hey, wake up, Congress, especially the House. You have the authority. You can subpoena people. You can focus their minds on telling the truth under oath. Why aren't you doing it? Let's go ahead one. Here's his piece on his own website, Who's Lying, Garland or the Whistleblowers? That's definitely worth a read if you go to jonathanturley.org. But go to the next one. I wanted, this is sort of a summary of what he said. This is what he said on Fox. He said, the different accounts we've heard about what happened in the investigation cannot be reconciled. Somebody's lying, and there's a real criminal and impeachable conduct that could be raised. And that means Congress's power is at its apex. And they can move forward, and it needs to move forward, and it has a full array of powers to do that with. And here's Turley, the constitutionalist and constitutional law. This is an area where Congress has authority, and it's its full apex. Why aren't you using it?
Well, if it's a scenario about the arbitrariness of the Department of Justice, you know, if there's a group of people in government representing the coup that has gone on, and they control the Department of Justice, and you know, the FBI and the CIA and all this other stuff, and war, I mean, it's over in many ways. But what we're trying to do, hopefully wake up enough people to realize, you know, what's really going on. And this is part of it. And I think Jonathan really hones in on the real importance of the significance to the Congress. The Congress becomes moot, you know, all of a sudden not doing the things they should do and doing all the things they shouldn't be doing. You know?
There was a Pride March, a drag queen parade over the weekend in New York. So go forward a little bit if you can. Let me see. One more. There we go. So Pride marchers take to New York City chanting, "We're coming for your children." Now that used to be called a conspiracy theorist, Dr. Paul, if you suggested that there was some sort of strange agenda involving children on this. And obviously, it's none of our business what people do in the privacy of their home. But when you come for people's children, it does have a different flair about it. And so here they are, and I'm not going to play the clip because I looked at it for a second, and there are people that are dressed in a way that's inappropriate for a family show. But they were walking down the street in New York City saying, "We're coming for your kids."
But the big thing is that they get a lot of attention, and I say, boy, they are really getting powerful, but they're not that powerful. Their percentages for people who believe this wokeism, radical wokeism, it's amazing. It's the people in the left wing radicalism, but it's also the money behind this. Wokeism is part of the corporate system, so it comes together with the movement of Marxism and cultural Marxism, because there's a lot of cultural things in here, and there's a lot of finance in here. There's a lot of appropriations and wars and all these things. So we need to get that defined so the American people know what they ought to be doing, because right now it's not a good sign for what America will be like in the next few years.
Yeah, and I was just writing down cultural Marxism just before you said it, so we have a mind meld going. But, you know, there are plenty of very prominent gay folks, gay leaders on the left and the right who are very, very verbally opposed to what's happening. I think about people like Dave Rubin, Glenn Greenwald, and others. people that we know, they say, we don't want any part of this. You know, our lifestyle is not about this. And so I think it's not a liberation movement in a sense of your personal preferences and behaviors. But as you say, it's a cultural Marxist movement. And they're using the gay community, I think, to push an agenda that can actually be very harmful to them, because it can provoke a backlash, a general backlash against all people, for that sort of lifestyle. So it's pretty dangerous. And here, I'm going to play just a quick clip of the song. This is from a couple of years ago, but this kind of set things off. We're starting at 24 seconds. Let's just play up to 50 seconds, where they almost take delight and enjoy the idea that we're going to come get your kids. If we can cue that video up. I don't know if we have. There we go. Yeah, go ahead and just click play there.
Think that we'll corrupt your kids if our agenda goes unchecked.
Can we full screen that, please?
Just this once, you're correct. We'll convert your children. Happens bit by bit, quietly and subtly, and you will barely notice it. We'll convert your children.
You can probably take it down now.
We'll make them tolerate.
So that's they took down this video because it was viewed as being too controversial. But it's almost like when they secretly tell the truth out loud,
So,
yeah.
okay. The thing here is, it brings to mind my argument that freedom is designed to bring people together. And once they understand this, whether they have, well, I think you alluded to that, because people have different sexual behaviors, but they're nonviolent.
Yeah.
That's what they have to understand. You can be diverse. That's the wonderful thing of libertarianism. Diversity isn't a problem. It is not a job of the government to use force to make people diverse. So you have a few people. This radical genderism can be handled, especially if they would recognize that taking little kids and mutilating them isn't part of what freedom is all about. That is mutilation and it's violence and taking care of kids who can't even think for themselves. But I am convinced that people come together. So people who have different economic theories, if they have different social theories, they have different religious beliefs, why can't you do it? And the only thing that people have to remember is just say that both sides of the argument, both sides of the transactions, everything that we do, both sides should agree to it. If not, just walk away.
Yeah.
And yet here it's going on. They're doing the opposite. They have 3% or 2% or 1% of the population that are gone nuts, and they're in defense of liberty are able to coerce business people and a lot of other people. Oh, yeah, I know. I don't agree with them, but they have their rights, you know. But they don't have the right to destroy the liberty and get that liberty they want for the minority by taking it away from the majority is what they're doing.
Yeah.
So that's a shame. That's why I think they should think more. People should think more seriously about, following the rules of libertarianism and freedom and independent liberty, and the world would be a lot better off.